Manchester's indie rock and roll station, XS Manchester. The XS Manchester Long Player, an iconic album in full with Jim Salverson. XS Manchester.
You're right, I'm Jim and welcome to another episode of the XS Long Player, where I take a classic album and deep dive into it with one of the people who made it. Back to 1991 today to talk about the release of The Farm's debut album Spartacus, in the company of the man himself, Peter Hooton. Good chat this with Peter about an album that, if I'm honest, I'd not listened to right the way through in a long time before preparing for this episode. But what an album it is. Scene defining, you might call it, and with a political angle to it that I don't think I picked up when I listened to it back in the 90s. Loads of great stories from Peter, including his thoughts on Everton making the iconic All Together Now a cup final song, which must have been an interesting thing from a Liverpool fan's perspective, and the truth behind those infamous rumours concerning an ongoing conflict between The Farm and Oasis. If this is your first time to the XS Long Player, make sure you check out the episodes back in the timeline. Some fantastic conversations about some of the greatest albums of all time, so check that out. But for now, get settled and listen to Peter Hooton from The Farm talking about their debut album, Spartacus. Peter, thanks for joining us on the show today. So we're going to talk about The Farm's debut album, Spartacus. And right before we get into the nuts and bolts of this album, I'm interested in your journey into becoming a songwriter, because I'm not sure I'd call you a reluctant songwriter, but certainly originally it wasn't something that maybe you'd had the confidence of doing. What was the spark that made you want to start writing music?
I'd always been interested in music, of course, and I've been in a get-together, a school band and that type of thing, but they were pretty dominant figures in that, so I never got the chance to write, really, I was the George Harrison of the setup, But I think it was after John Lennon got shot dead, I think. I just started writing my thoughts down, because it was such a traumatic moment in time, really, wasn't it? And everyone, it was such an outpouring of grief. And I just started writing. I didn't know the lyrics. They were like poems, And so that's how I got into it. But I'd never really intended to be a singer or anything. It was all just serendipity and by chance, Being in a group, as I say, when I was younger, but then I played the bass guitar. I think Sid Vicious was probably more accomplished than me, but I played the bass guitar, but never really took it up seriously, But I was staying in my mates one night in a place called Mellon, which is just outside Kirby at Aintree. And it was during the, when the licensing hours used to shut for a few hours on a Sunday, just after midday, and his brother's band were playing. I said, "Oh, what's that?" I said, "Oh, that's our Ollie's band." So I said, "Oh, I'll go and have a listen to them." So we went to have a listen to them and said, "Where's your singing?" It was just a load of people jamming, really, So that's I said, "Oh, I'll get up and have a go if you want." And everyone said, "Oh, if you want to have a go, have a go." And that's how it started.
That's a very uniquely Liverpool thing, I think, because I'm obviously based in Manchester, but when I've been to Liverpool, there's been similar things going on. It's kind of like, it's a very musical city anyway, but it's very much a lot of the bars and clubs, and particularly up and down like Matthew Street. It's kind of like a get up and have a go environment.
Yeah, well, I think it is a musical city, and I think, there's numerous theories for that, but I think definitely the Irish and Welsh influence on the city is pretty important, and I think the Irish brought over the tradition of sing-songs in pubs. And, I'm not saying Liverpool was the only city that did that, but it had a particular history of doing that. And I always remember when I was a kid, at Christmas and, various occasions, all my aunties and uncles getting round and singing, And everyone had to have a song, and they pointed, your turn next, and they tried to encourage the kids, us, to get involved, but no one would really sing, But I had a go once of a song from West Side Story. I think it was called Somewhere, So I had a go at that, just because I thought, let's have a go at it, And they all seemed to be having a great time. And some of the songs I've never heard before or since, they were like traditional songs, And I always distinctly remember one of them, if you're Irish, come into the parlour. I don't know the rest of the words, but I just remember that statement, And I think, it was a tradition. and working class tradition, but probably a lot down to the Irish influence, And of course, there was a lot of Welsh in Liverpool as well. I read somewhere that at one stage in the 19th century, there were 70 Welsh Methodist churches, and they would have been Welsh speaking. And obviously, what are the Welsh famous for? Singing. So I think there was definitely a tradition of get up and have a go.
Well, West Side Story was a bit of a musical shift to where you ended up with the farm, and even in the early days of the band there was a musical shift there as well, because I understand that before you kind of got involved in the baggy psychedelic scene and that kind of genre that I'd put Spartacus into, your interests or the sound of the band in those early stages was more aligned with the Clash and the Jam and those kind of punk sounds. What was it that inspired the change to go from that kind of quite edgy punk stuff to the kind of baggy psychedelic side of stuff?
Yeah, I don't like to call it baggy because I don't even know what that means. But I remember the NME and Sounds and Melody Maker searching around for a term to call it, and it was scally-delic and that type of thing, but nothing ever. Indie dance was probably the one that stuck, But it was Big Odo Dynamite, believe it or not. Mick Jones and the Clash obviously formed with Don Letts. And I went to see them in Liverpool in a nightclub called Estate. And it just blew my mind. All the samples from spaghetti westerns and all the different drum beats and all the New York influences, all the New York street influences that Mick and Don Letts had picked up, I remember I was with Carl Hunter from the band, and I think it was with Simon Moran from SJM, because he was, a big friend of the farm, and he was helping us out at the time. And I was like, after it, I was evangelical. I was going, you want to hear this band? It's unbelievable, Incorporating those two styles of music of like hip hop beats and R&B beats and indie, and that's what it was. And I thought so. It took 2 or 3 years for us to get the confidence to get a sampler, basically, and try it out, and we had a bit of financial backing because those early samplers were very expensive, and we got someone to financially back us so we could afford a sampler. And we said to one of the brass section, learn this. And he did. And he ended up working after the farm with the Happy Mondays. And then he went on to take that and other groups. And, he was in demand because he knew the whole sampling system and the whole backing track system,
It's amazing how many bands ended up incorporating into their sound something that they just happened to have bought because it looked cool. Had no idea how to use it, but they bought it and went, hey, we'll give this a go. We'll work it out.
Yeah. And it was... it was revolutionary. It was people didn't know what to expect, and some bands, if you listen to like the Chemical Brothers, and the Orb and groups like that, Massive Attack, they were brilliant exponents of it, and they never classed in that, as you said before, the indie dance, but they were using samplers, same as groups like us and the Happy Mondays were,
It's interesting you mention samples because that is a theme that runs through the album, and it kicks off the album with a quote from Taxi Driver, which I guess was kind of you caught in controversy from the very start of the album, because I think you claimed that the lines in that song were improvised rather than sampled from the original film. Was that purely kind of like a rights issue? Yeah,
we got one of our mates who's an actor, and he's brilliant impersonator to impersonate all the voices, and he was brilliant, And, they sound like the originals, don't they? I mean, they sound like the originals. So, it was a case of having to do it, because we knew people were getting sued for using samples which they hadn't cleared,
That's quite forward thinking of a young band who are kind of just setting out to have that kind of consideration about what you can and can't use and being that cautious about it. I guess it must have been, if you want to use samples, that must be something that's quite almost difficult to juggle in your head, kind of wanting to use certain pieces of audio, but then thinking, oh, hang on, we could get knackered for this down the line.
Yeah, we were thinking of that. I mean, there's probably a few cases at the time in the press, I think, probably about people using samples which they hadn't agreed. I think De La Soul were getting sued by various people, and so it was newsworthy, so we thought we better cover our backs here,
One of the things that I picked up on listening back to this album, and I definitely didn't pick this up in the early 90s when I was listening to it, I think I was far too young to look this deeply into it, but was the political themes that run right through many of the tunes. And even with that opening track, Hearts and Minds, which is something you look back on
intrinsically linked with a lot of the politics of the time. I think it was Hearts and Minds was one of the phrases used by Margaret Thatcher in one of her speeches around the time of the release as well. Did you see music at this time and the music you were making as a force for change, for your ability to get your voice heard and do something different?
Yeah, you see groups that we'd always admired, like The Clash, Specials and The Jam, you know, their songs meant something, you know. So we wanted, even though that period was regarded as throwaway hedonism, you know, we wanted to make a political statement. And I think, as you say, one of the first people to mention this, but throughout the album is politics, really. And Altogether Now is a political statement, you know. It's an anti-war song, you know. Groovy Train was about a girl I know who was into politics and then found ecstasy and rejected politics, you know. So there was all sorts of themes running through it, you know.
On the topic of Altogether Now, which I think is probably one of the most recognised songs on the album.
Yeah.
I understand the original version was had six verses on it, which Suggs, who was the producer in the album, as in Suggs from Madness, he was producing. He cut down to a kind of radio-friendly 3 verses in the end.
That's right, yeah.
Was that what he brought to the table as a producer, kind of an understanding of the music industry, how it worked and the commercial side of it?
Yeah, I mean, at the time, I wanted the 6 verses in, but when your mentor, Suggs, says, no, I'm telling you, we only need 3. You've got to take his word for it, haven't you? And he brought those type of ideas. I suppose we were young and naive and thinking, you know, we want the full story in, because the original track, No Man's Land, had a story about Lord Kitchener having to go to the House of Parliament and explain to politicians why there wasn't any fighting going on the Western Front, you know. But I think Suggs was right. You know, it makes its point.
It's very much a tune that has stood the test of time, that it was a definitive tune of the early 90s, and it's had a fair few incarnations since. I was trying to come up with a list. It's been an Everton Cup final song, I think. It was covered by Atomic Kitten. I think it's been in a John Lewis. I think it's been in a John Lewis advert too, hasn't it? I was wondering, how do you feel about those different genesis of the song, particularly as a Liverpool fan, the Everton version?
Yeah, you know, I mean, I found out a couple of years ago when England used it for 2004 for the Euros, that England were going to use Altogether Now for the Euro 96. But because Everton used it, they asked the Lightning Seeds to write a new song. And that's how you got 3 Lions, you know. We didn't know that till later on, obviously, but I didn't want Everton to use it. And, you know, I've got to be honest about this. Not because it was Everton, just because I didn't want the lyrics changed. I didn't want it to be belittled by being a throwaway flipping. It was a political song, so I didn't want that. But we had a guitarist in the group called Keith Mullen, who's still in the group, and he's an Evertonian, and he said, oh, you know, my lad's looking forward to meeting the team, going down to Wembley, and we've been promised all sorts and all that. And it had already been recorded by session musicians in London, so it just needed a vocal on it. So I said, look, I'm nothing to do with it, Keith, you know, but I asked my dad. My dad's just been a season ticket holder at Anfield since 1962. And I said, what do you think? And he said, well, if you don't let them use it, it's a bit hypocritical, isn't it? Because you're saying enemies coming into no man's land to shake hands. So in the end, I folded, you know, and let them use it. But I still think it was the wrong idea, just because they changed the lyrics, you know. I was thinking about the unity of the band, really, at the time. I thought Keith's going to, if we don't let them use it, you know, we could walk, you know, and we'd already split up, actually, but he just wanted to keep everyone on, you know, on speaking terms rather than ended up in court, you know.
I mean, given your political views and that it has got this kind of like outspoken political thread running through the album, do you get disappointed when the meaning is lost? And like you say, it gets kind of chucked into that. I remember a few reviews at the time kind of saying the album didn't really have much substance from a writing perspective, where clearly that's just them not getting the album rather than actually the lack of substance in it. Do you get disappointed when you heard that kind of thing?
No, I mean, the album reviews at the time were glowing, you know. And they've got album of the month in Vox, album of the week in the NME. There were a few journalists, though, who were obviously opposed to us, not only the way we were, but obviously our politics, you know. And there were a few snide remarks, I remember them, you know. But I'd say 95% of the reviews were brilliant, and especially in America, where Liverpool didn't have those connotations and left wing didn't have those connotations. So just people just listened to the album, you know. I mean, I'm not disappointed at that because, that's people's opinions, and they're entitled to their opinion. But I always remember reviewing we did in Belfast, and it was brilliant, and everyone who was there thought one of the great nights in Belfast, they said, of concerts, both communities singing all together now, and it was really emotional. And the reviewer just didn't understand it. They just didn't get it, Either they deliberately didn't get it, or, for whatever reason, But for me, that was a symbolic moment. But in Belfast in 1991, the Troubles are still going on. And you've got both communities there singing a peace song, It was unbelievable, and people still get in touch with us now over that, saying one of the greatest nights they'd ever had in Belfast, in terms of concerts, and thinking about all the groups that have played there. We were flattered by that, The one thing about Spartacus and All Together Now is the Germans really get it, I mean, There's been so many cover versions in Germany, techno, mad versions, 150 beats per minute versions, and a lot of them are German and Dutch, Yeah, they get it completely. They get it more than Middle England get it, really, I think.
I want you to pick a moment off the album in a moment, if that's cool. Anything you remember from the writing or recording, or a moment in the studio, or just a musical moment that you like, something that's a highlight for you. But before we do that, I want to talk about the album being number one.
Yeah.
Do you remember where you were when you got the news that this album had hit that number one spot?
Yeah, I think we were on tour in Brighton. And we, obviously, because of the pre-sale and all the publicity surrounding it, we were expecting it to go to number one, but there wasn't any celebrations on it. There wasn't any, we were just thinking, what about the concert tonight? It was like, it was one of those situations. If we hadn't been on tour, I think we all would have headed to town, had a great big piss up, But it didn't happen because we were on tour, because every night was like that anyway. So there was no difference, There was a shrug of the shoulders, basically, and I think not that we'd become blasé. We were like in a dream. It was like a dream-like state, because when you're on tour, you've got so many people on tour with your roadies and catering and everything, and it's just a case of let's get on with it, let's get on with it. We're only as good as our last concert, type of thing. There was no opening bottles of champagne or anything like that, It was just like, it was strange, really, looking back on it.
Well, you say you hadn't become blasé, but was there a kind of almost an expectation because of the buzz that had built up around the band? Was it like it felt like you were fulfilling destiny rather than maybe getting a shock result?
Yeah, I think so. And, what we were most proud of, that we'd done it ourselves. We'd taken on the major record labels and done it ourselves. And it was very unusual. A lot of indie groups at the time were distributed by major labels, but we weren't. We were distributed by Pinnacle. We were a pure indie. And Pinnacle at the time said they'd never known anything like it in the indie genre. They'd never known anything like it. The KLF, Bill Drummond used to be ringing our office going, come on, who's behind this? Come on. And it was basically Kevin Sampson, our manager, and the group and people from Produce who were supplying the money, There was no great master plan as such. A lot of it was down to Kevin, our manager, and he was the maverick. He was the person who thought he knew what to do, and for 18 months, he was untouchable, But like every football manager, results start to go wrong, I think it was basically, I always remember Simon Moran saying to us, he said, we were playing in Newcastle. It was the end of 91 or 92, I think. And Simon said, it hasn't sold out, That was the first time in 18 months a gig hadn't sold out, I said, what's going on? And they said, this group playing at the university called Nirvana. And we'd heard of Nirvana because we toured in America, and we loved them and that, but, they were it was the new wave of, and a lot of the journalists were happy with that because they never understood what the likes of us were doing. They never understood it, because they weren't part of it. They wanted guitar groups back, so it was like they were going back to what they actually knew about,
How did it feel getting that number one album and being kind of thrust into the limelight almost, and having the number one album and the sold out gigs and the Top of the Pops appearances as well?
Yeah.
Did you cope with that sudden change of being in the limelight?
I don't, it was, I wouldn't say it was difficult because it wasn't, we were just swept along by a tidal wave, But you've got to, I think you were thinking this is going to, this could end next week, And if you ever listen to any groups, that's what they always think. There's a fatalism about them thinking, this can't last, this can't last. And during that period, we were having such a great time. Things didn't register really, it was like we were in like a dream-like trance, that's what was happening, and people started to, I wouldn't say everyone acted differently, but people from, we were really hard working in 89 and 1990. By 91, that had gone a little bit, that had gone of like, sit back, we can release anything and it'll do well type of thing, There's certainly a feeling of that in the group,
Peter, I'd like you to pick your highlight off the album then. Like I say, it can be a memory from the recording sessions or a favourite track on the album. If you're going to pick one thing, what would it be?
Well, we recorded most of it in Mayfair Studios in Primrose Hill. And that was before Primrose Hill was a trendy place. Most of the cafes were shut, it was like a forgotten area really, and so we had some great times around the pubs and bars around there, But I always remember at the time Madness weren't together, they disbanded, but Chaz Smash was working for Godis, the dancer, and Suggs was producing and Suggs was saying, oh, Chaz wants to come in and listen to some of the tracks, Suggs must have been telling them about them, And anyway, we let Chaz in because we knew him. He came in, listened to them. He said, I've got to let Andy MacDonald from Godis listen to these. They're unbelievable, And so we reluctantly, after a while, let Andy MacDonald in, And he listened to some of the tracks and then he heard All Together Now and he went, that's a Christmas number one. That's a Christmas number one. He said, but if you stay on Produce, getting distributed by Pinnacle Records, it won't be. But if you come with me, if you sign to Godis now, it will be. And we all just had a bit of a meeting about it and then gave him the answer, nah, you're all right, Andy, we'll do it ourselves. So that was like one of the, I wouldn't say the highlights, but because we hadn't been signed by a major label, you see, and we'd had loads of near misses where they were saying like, oh, sack the drummer or do this or do everything we say. And, I always remember someone coming to us, I think it was Bill Drummond, I think it was, in the mid-80s saying, I know what you're about, I can see what you're trying to do. And of course, this was before the Mondays and the Stone Roses and that, and he said, I know what you're going to, just, if I get involved, you just got to do everything I say and you'll end up on top of the pops within 18 months or whatever. And he said, I want you to have hard dogs on stage. I said, what? He said, I want you to have hard dogs on stage. And I just laughed at him and said, Bill, you are joking, aren't you? And anyway, we never took up his offer. I know Tony Wilson was very interested in the farm. He offered us Gurnard's Reports, and we went there and we recorded it, and we did all our stuff, and then it never got shown. And then a few years later, when we were doing a documentary for Gurnard about politics and music from Merseyside, we went to find it, and it had been wiped, lost forever, but we had a theory that Tony Wilson was thinking, I'm going to get a Manchester band who look exactly like the farm, I think that's what happened.
You mentioned some pretty iconic Manchester names there, Mondays, Roses, Tony Wilson. But I understand that back in the day, back in the heyday of the 90s, you had a bit of a run-in with some other famous Mancs, namely Liam and Noel Gallagher. Yeah,
well, it was, it's steeped in, it's never in any of their books, but the first interview they ever did was in an interview in Vox, I think it was, and they just signed to Creation, and it must have been about 93, and they said, we made Alan McGee take a post of the farm down, Now, we didn't know why at the time, but Alan McGee's told us since, and he said, look, everything the farm did, I was looking at you, and I was looking for a band like that, and it was Oasis, But we'd come across Oasis when they were rehearsing with the Real People a lot in Liverpool. The Real People had met us in a bar in Liverpool City Centre and said, look, there's this band, and they love you, they look just like you, and it's all the image that you've got, that terrace image. And they said, any chance of getting them on the tour as a support? And we already had a tour support called Top, who were a Liverpool band. So we had to knock them back, Maybe they remembered that. But anyway, in this interview, he said they made Alan McGee take a farm poster down in his office. But Alan said, what would I be doing with a farm poster in my office? And that didn't happen, And then he said, the farm, they're just a bunch of chances, but they think they're the Beatles type of thing. We didn't know their obsession with the Beatles at the time. We had no idea, So when they played the Lomax, which is a small club, 300 capacity in Liverpool, just when they were releasing the first singles, you know. And we went down there, and it was much ado about nothing, really. But we sent a couple of lads over to their sound check, middle of the afternoon, with a picture of us with Love from the Beatles on. Because that's what Tony Wolsey had done with Love from Manchester when he was supporting Liverpool City Council in the 1980s, when all the councillors were surcharged with taking on the Thatcher government, you know. So we thought if they know the history, they'll know what that means. That's a peace offering, really. So anyway, they wouldn't come over to the pub because they thought it was a setup. They thought we were after them, you know. We went to try and get in the gig. So we walked up, about 10 of us, the farm and a few mates, you know. And they said, sorry, lads, we've been told by Oasis and management not to let the farm in.
Wow, blacklisted.
So we said, okay, yeah. So we started discussing the reasons and that. And in the end, we got it. They let us in, you know, because they couldn't really say no, you know. So we watched the band and, you know, the early concert, it was, you know, it was electric, you know, and it was great guitar sounds and that. And we enjoyed it. And then after the concert, I think Noel and Liam came to the bar and a few of us were having a drink and they were saying, we never said that about you, we never said it, you know, it's the journalist made it up, journalist, man, we just saying, so what, you know, that's the way it is in the media, you know. Anyway, in the meantime, there was a few, I won't name the members of the group, but some of the members of the group and our management were outside. And when the group Oasis come up the stairs, you know, to go get into the van, they said, and were confrontational. They said, we've just been with the farm downstairs. And they go, no, this is the real farm. So they went back into the dressing rooms to get away from them, you know. In the meantime, he said culprits let down the tyres of their bus, which was nothing to do with me and a few of the others, you know, but it happened. And but it's never, ever been mentioned because it didn't, you know, it doesn't fit in with the image, does it? I knew the week later that, you know, the tide was going out on the farm and the Oasis, their press officer had more pull because it said in the NME there was alleged, there was going to be the farm were going to confront Oasis over what they'd written about them in a paper. But on the night when it came, the farm were nowhere to be seen. A complete and utter lie. But, you know, we knew then, you know, the NME are going to champion these lads and obviously they went on to do brilliant things, didn't they, in terms of the sales and that, you know. But everything I told you there is the truth, you know. And I've seen them since, you know, and there's no... I mean, in fact, I saw Liam a few weeks later, believe it or not, at a Blair gig in Manchester. And he come up again, he was saying, we never said that, you know, letting the ties down, it's out of order, we never said that. And I just turned round to him, and he wasn't a famous character there, and I just said to him, that's showbiz, lad. Forget about it, you know.
Before I let you go, Peter, you've just passed the 30th anniversary of this album a couple of years back, and I know you did a lot of chat around that and a lot of looking back at the album. Now you do look back at it through the mists of time, and I'm sure you've listened back to it at some point since. Is there anything you regret? Is there anything you hear and you go, if I had my time again, I'd just tweak that or I'd just change that?
No, I think it stands the test of time, and I think if you listen to it, it does. A lot of people say that, you know, when they get in touch, say it does stand up, because a lot of the songs were original songs in the 80s, but we had to adapt them to use, you know, hip-hop beats and that type of thing. But if you listen to Groovy Train's got a loop on it by Third Bass, who the American New York hip-hop band, you know. And when we went on tour with Big Audio Dynamite, in 91, we toured all America with them. There was a group called Downtown Science, and Sam Severs, who did all those loops for Third Bass, was in Downtown Science. And he was at a sound check, and he was listening to our sound check. And he came up to the stage and went, I recognise a few of those beats. And we said, I know, Sam, how much do we owe you? And he went, no, man, I'm flattered. He was the top man, you know, in that period in New York, you know, so... I don't think there is anything I'd change from the tracks. I don't think there is, no. You know, I mean, there's a remix album on the vinyl by Terry Farley and Pete Heller, and some of the remixes on that are like exceptional. You can get them on Spotify now, the 30th anniversary edition. But no, I don't think there's anything on there. The only regret I've got is that he didn't put Stepping Stone on there.
Right.
Which we
was
should have done maybe.
First single, wasn't it, that you released before the album?
We should have put that on. We were being too cool for school. We were thinking all the people who were in Ibiza in 1990 and all the Boys Own and Flying crowd who popularised Stepping Stone, they'll be upset if it's on an album, you know, but we should just put it on the album. And then Kevin said to us, Kevin Sampson, our manager, said, what you should do after Spartacus is re-release Stepping Stone. And we disagreed with him, you know. And he was in the right, we were in the wrong, you know. This is what happens with bands. As soon as you get successful, everyone in the band thinks it was down to their opinion that you got successful, instead of leaving it to, you know, the likes of Kevin, who was giving us advice for 18 months, you know. And he was right. We should have either put it on the album and released it as a single, or just released it as a single anyway. I wish Stepping Stone was on the album. I think it might have been on the American version. So I think that's one of the only regrets I've got, it, that we didn't have Stepping Stone on there.
If that's your only regret, you're doing all right. Peter, it's really nice to talk to you about this classic album. I really enjoyed rediscovering the album and listening to it in a completely different way to I listened to it when it first came out in the 90s. I'm going to put a link to the album classic version and a link to the remixes that you just mentioned in the podcast description as well, so people can find them there.
So, when you listen to it again, did you think it stood the test of time?
Yeah, completely. I mean, like I say, it's of a time to me, but at the same time, listening to it now with 30 years distance between it being released, I can hear different things in it now that I wouldn't have picked up to before. And part of that's my age and part of that's my life experience, but part of it's listening to it in the frame of the music that came after as well. So in my view, 100%.
Okay, that'll do me.
Peter, really appreciate your time on the XS Long Player.
Pleasure, thank you.
The XS Manchester Long Player, an iconic album in full with Jim Salverson. XS Manchester.
Nice one, Peter, and nice one to you for listening to the XS Long Player, another album boxed off. If this has whetted your appetite to get the inside scoop, the hidden stories behind more of your favourite albums, do look at some of the episodes that have come before. If you're into this episode, if you like the Farm Spartacus, then you're probably going to like the Oasis episodes. There's two of them, one about Be Here Now and one about Definitely Maybe, with Alan McGee talking us through that album. I reckon the Happy Mondays episode with Gaz Whelan, that might tickle your fancy. And maybe if the Liverpool thing is your jam, then the Lightning Seeds episode talking about jollification with the legend that is Ian Brody. Have a listen to that one. But you know what, just have a look back through the timeline, see if you can spot some of your favourite albums and get stuck in. I'll see you next time.
The XS Manchester Long Player, an iconic album in full with Jim Salverson. XS Manchester.